Energy Transition Dialogue.
Welcome, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, to this plenary session with the hosts of the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. And I will kindly ask the media representatives to finish up. Thank you very much. We are very grateful that the ministers could make time to join us on a very intensive day when the German Parliament has been conducting a crucial vote. And without further ado, it is my great honor to hand over to Germany's Federal Minister for Foreign Affairs, Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock. The floor is yours.
And good afternoon. We know that you have already started, but this is maybe also a sign for these rushy and very challenging times. But now in the afternoon, also officially as the host here, welcome to the 11th Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue. Sorry that Minister Habeck and I were a bit late, but we just participated in I would say, historic session of the German Parliament, the German Bundestag. 2/3 of parliamentarians took today for us, and maybe also for Europe, a landmark decision. We paved the way to massively invest in Germany's security, infrastructure, and by that, freedom. We will do with this decision and change of our constitution whatever is necessary for our own defense. We tabled furthermore a 500 billion infrastructure package, which include 100 billion for climate neutrality, which will boost investments into infrastructure and especially also to boost renewables. And we are by that, we are also enshrining climate neutrality by 2045 in our constitutions. Measures which are for those who work in the field of climate and energy for long overdue, but especially in these times of crisis, we believe more important than ever. Because we realize that in these times we need decisions which are big and bold. Because energy policy infrastructure is not an isolated issue anymore, it's part of a new geopolitical world. Some actors are pushing for a world order that is not based on rules, but based on power. Therefore, we believe it's crucial to invest in our own security. And we all know investing in renewable energy is part of investing into our security and thereby investing in our strengths. And this is why, for a couple of different dialogues, we have combined these fields already in the past here together. Climate and energy, geopolitical politics, investments, infrastructure, and security. Because we all know that these investments into green energy are investments also in global security. We see it, unfortunately, already since 3 years in our direct neighborhood in Ukraine. Energy plans, infrastructure plans are a deliberate target for airstrikes because they are the nerve of our country. By that, a freedom nerve of the whole country. We see it positively in the opposite as well. If we invest in our own energy infrastructure, we become more free and more independent. So the cut of Russian gas was also an investment in our own security, and by that we boosted, especially Minister Habeck, boosted the renewable energies. And worldwide we see that if we are not investing into a climate and green energy transition, we will also see a worsening of conflict, or put it positively again. The more we do for fighting the climate crisis together, the more secure our world will be. And therefore, at the last COP in Dubai, the COP28 was also a COP for security, because there we tripled our renewable energy. We doubled our energy efficiency, and we underlined the transition away from fossil fuels. By that, in 2024, the global investments in clean energy were nearly twice those in fossil fuels. And we know that this pathway just has to be gone like this also in the future years. But we have also seen around the world that energy transition is not everywhere happening on the same pace, because it's not everywhere equally easy. And therefore the question is not if we will make this change, but how we can achieve this global energy transition in a fair and just way. How can we set conditions on a global level that everybody benefits from our energy transition? By unlocking barriers, by mobilizing the finance for all, by navigating in geopolitical tensions, by reforming the international financial system, but also by getting better and better in hands-on solutions on the local levels, where we study here together practices and case studies, learn from each other, like in the last years, from countries which are almost there at climate neutrality, like Kenya and others. And this is why this Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue, in these even more shaky times, is more important than ever. This is why we are so happy that you are here from all over Europe, but also from all over the world, to bring together our expertise, to learn from each other on this pathway, and yes, especially to learn from each other on this very special day for Germany. And therefore, it would be no better speaker for today than Germany's energy and economy and climate minister, also vice chancellor for the last remaining weeks of our government in power, Robert Habeck. I welcome you to the stage for the introductory speech. A big applause for Robert Habeck.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I was asked to speak in German, so if you don't understand German, please take on your headphones. I think it's due to the German media, so these, if you're familiar with the German media landscape, people are not really used to see German politicians talk in English, so I think it's therefore. Yeah, you're laughing, but... See, all the the international movies are translated. They have undertext in Germany. Therefore, everyone hears German translation in the international movies and reads the German undertext, which means that our school English is nearly forgotten after school. And smaller countries like Denmark or Netherlands, which have not 80 million people watching television in the same language or the German language, they then are better in English. So that might be the reason that we do now my speech, or I do my speech now in German. Liebe Annalena, vielen Dank für die Konferenz.
Thank you very much, Annalena, for this conference, and thank you very much to the Foreign Office for the cooperation that we've had over the past 3.5 years. This conference, and I would go as far as to say German, European and international climate policy have been thought together and designed together. This may well be the last conference for Annalena Baerbock and me, and that's why I would like to take a more fundamental note. I would like to take a look back to the past 10 years of this conference and put this into the focus of the past weeks when we've had to recalibrate things. So behind many of the conflicts that we are seeing in the world, behind the many crises that we are trying to resolve in a diplomatic way, and behind the many crises and conflicts and wars, there is one main line of confrontation. So we all live in different countries, we have our own political culture, we all have our own history. So it would be wrong to say that history of one country is the same for other countries, and the same is true for Germany and for Europe. So the history of Germany, the mentality of Germans, is very much shaped by the two world wars that Germany started, that it waged on Europe and the world, and the many people who lost their lives. So this has then given rise to stable democracy, and there's a learned reticence against anything that is military. And that is right, because if you're too passionate about the military, if you think that wars can resolve conflicts, well, that is the kind of belief that waged a lot of war. But other countries won these wars and said their military is the guarantor of their freedom. This is true in Europe, and it will be the same internationally. So there are many diverse approaches to this. So what I will be saying is not to be misconstrued. Of course, I'm adopting a German perspective, but I don't want to tell you that we are right and that everything should be the way that we see it. Nevertheless, I think there is one line of confrontation that is not neutral, and that has increasingly come under pressure. It's the line of confrontation between freedom and force, violence. So we used to live in a world where we hoped that after the end of the rivalry between the West and the East, the world should be regarded as one, that we would have an international system of rules, that we would regard the world as one community. So we had a World Trade Organization, global climate agreements, global aid agreements within the umbrella of the UN, that we would diplomatically resolve conflicts between peoples. And we thought if we traded together, if we talked to each other, then we would all benefit. So that used to be the mindset after 1990. And I think today we have to see that this order that used to be called globalization, that this global world, this global family is, well, that it is a broken family. We are now seeing that geopolitics is guided by interests and spheres of influences. And sometimes the global thinking has already been pushed back. And often interests are being pursued using military force or violence. So this breaks the very root of what used to be our thinking, namely that peoples, nations could decide about their own fate in freedom, and that force and violence are now taking over. And there's an even deeper misunderstanding, namely that freedom does not mean the freedom to do anything, and that freedom does not mean the absence of rules. That's true in our private lives. So in the name of freedom, I will not do my housework, I will not look after my family, my partner. Well, then that's not a free relationship, it's an asocial relationship. And this is even more true within society. Of course, there are majorities, but minorities have the right to protection. And these should be guaranteed by government institutions, by the rule of law. So freedom does not mean that everyone is free to do whatever they want. Freedom means that you can freely decide about the rules at the national level, at the private level, and at international level. And this is an understanding that has broken, that has gone lost. So you can't just do anything. You need rules. And the freedom to change rules, to talk about others, this is something that has been lost. And in this way, the different attacks on freedom have one thing in common. Interests of a party are no longer being pursued within rules, discussions, conferences, and so forth, but using force. This may be easier for the one pursuing the violence, but nobody who is actually exercising power can be sure that they won't lose out sometime in the future. And once they lose out, they will no longer be interested in this system. And this actually means that there is an arms race going on. And history tells us that nothing will pursue, that empires will collapse, and that even the most powerful will be overcome. So the history of mankind or of humankind tells us that resolving conflicts via violence has only ever begot more violence and unhappiness. So what does anything that I've just said have to do with energy and climate policy? Well, everything from my point of view. I've said many times at this conference that Germany has learned the hard way that power is also something that is exercised in the field of energy and trade. This may be different among different countries, and again we have oil-producing, oil-exporting countries, and Germany and Europe are importing countries, so we buy oil and gas, but even for exporters it's not good to be dependent on one buyer. It's always good to diversify, both as an importer and also as an exporter. So this is what is needed. And diversification, building various trade relations, well, this means trading with one another. This idea of restoring security, reliability in our trading systems is different from actually forcing others into dependency. So Germany must not forget the high price that we've paid for our dependency. And other countries that have not been dependent should learn from Germany's bad example. And also oil exporting countries should rethink their trade relations and should diversify. And this will perhaps bring us a bit closer to justice in the World Trade Organization and beyond. Second point, fossil fuels are often drivers of conflict, international conflicts as well. And in order to minimize these, there is one answer, and that is to wave fossil fuels goodbye, to electrify, because electricity, and especially electricity from renewables, that is not coal-based or oil-based, but sun or geothermal energy-based, create security and resilience. This is how Germany was able to act within the past 3 years. So we've increased the share of renewables by around 40% to 60%, and it's allowed us to actually reduce our dependency on oil and gas imports. If you then look at the sectors that are not decarbonized yet, so heat transport, then you see that the production, the generation of renewables also increases security and stability within society. This also builds fresh revenue, because you're not losing the revenue to other countries, to exports. Countries that are building their energy systems should really look at this way, and I think this is the way forward. So it would be wrong to actually use fossil fuels in sun-rich countries, in Africa, for instance. So we should use our experience. So we used to benefit, well, the West used to benefit from fossil fuels, and it would be wrong to actually learn by that example. So in the past 3 years, we've really managed to do something that is incredible, and nobody would have believed this possible. If you look at the electricity grids, you find that we approved around 300 kilometers of electricity grids per year. We've reached 2,000 kilometers. If we look at onshore wind energy, we've increased our capacity from 1.5 to 10 gigawatts. And, well, for solar energy, demand is incredibly, it's going through the roof. And people are using low-cost electricity for their own use. So it really isn't all too difficult in a densely populated industrial country, but it is hard work. I won't deny that. And it also means living, tolerating conflict and resolving conflict. Apart from energy security and the price for renewables, and renewables are much cheaper than fossil fuels and also cheaper than new nuclear power plants, I would like to mention a third point, the main point of this conference, climate action. Of course, we need to resolve all these acute problems that we have at the moment, all these crises that you may be confronted with in your own countries and in your neighboring countries, things that make us lose sleep at night. But at the same time, we must not forget that we have one historic task. This political generation has the task of actually mitigating climate change. And if we look back 30 to 40 years, when we look back to this time, then the question for us will be, have you made a contribution to lowering greenhouse gas emissions? That's the question that will be put to us, and this has to do with freedom. And this is why our energy policy is a policy for freedom, not only in terms of trade or energy, but also in terms of climate action. 6 years ago, the German Federal Constitutional Court made a judgment that actually ordered every German government to make sure that future generations would still have the right to determine their own future, and that means protecting their future, mitigating climate change. This was 6 years ago. We are no longer talking about a distant future. We are not only talking about our children or grandchildren. We are talking about our own lives, about the present. We are seeing the catastrophic weather events, droughts. We're seeing wildfires. We're seeing all this at present. You know this from your own countries. We are seeing this in Germany. We are seeing events that should only have happened around every 100 years. They are now happening twice a year, and the speed is accelerating. Now, these are not events that are very interesting to nature. We are talking about natural disaster, and when we talk about climate action, we are not really talking about protecting the climate, as we say in German, but it's about protecting human lives. So if we want people to be able to self-determine, if we want the world to resolve conflict together, if we want to make self-determination something that is at the heart of politics and policies, well, whoever says yes to all these things has to do this beyond just one legislative term. Climate action policy is a basis, if not a guarantor, for a future in which people can take their own free decisions. So thank you very much on that note, and every fortune for the future.
Better turn around. I was going to say it later, but I'll say it now. Clearly, from all that you have both said, the mission of this event is more urgent than ever. And over the past 3.5 years, you have worked together to expand the breadth and the depth of the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue in a way that is commensurate with that mission. And I do think probably I speak for everyone in this room to express my gratitude. So, indeed. And the mission goes on. And the mission goes on, as both of you have said. So you both emphasized a theme that we've had here all day long, which is geopolitics. I think even in 2022, we did not discuss it with the fervor and intensity that we discussed it here today. And I'd like to pick up on some of those messages that you both have shared now in a keynote talk with two very special guests. I'll ask Minister Baerbock also to return to the stage, and let us welcome, and I'm going to keep the introductions very short in the interest of time, let us welcome the Vice President for Power, Energy, Climate Change and Green Growth at the African Development Bank, Kevin Kariuki. Welcome to you. Please join me on stage. Also, that will be your seat right here, please. That one, whatever they told you. I think that's Minister Baerbock's seat, actually. Whatever. And the Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, IRENA, is also with us. Francesco La Camera, please. Thank you. And Minister, please return. So you talked about geopolitics and the idea that some countries want to return to a world where it's power that rules, the power of the strongest. And in fact, energy is often seen as that power. And certainly energy has always been at the very center of geopolitics, now more than ever. We're hearing drill, baby, drill. Coming from the US. We're also seeing the US roll back both its global development cooperation efforts and its participation in global decarbonization. How concerned are you that this golden era of renewable energy that we thought we were in is suddenly coming to an end?
Actually, not at all. Because there are tipping points in climate which are horrible, like melting ice, which will never be returning at the polar circles, but there are also tipping points in investment. And we have invested globally so much into renewable energy. Also actually, and we had that also in our election campaigns here in Germany, companies invested so much into carbon neutral technologies that if we would like turn everything back, there were stranded investments of trillions around the world. So obviously we are not safe 100%. I mean, we know in these times nothing is obviously safe for 100% anymore. But I would say, especially for Europeans, but also for Africans and many different regions in the world, yeah, this is also a time when others say we are shying away, that we are saying then we double our investments, not only for climate reasons, for doing good in the world, but also for economic reasons. And our goal as a European Union is to now even become faster the first climate neutral continent in the world, because we believe that the future growth is heavily depending on that. And if we see the examples from around the world, also in my own country, 15 years ago, yeah, we discussed also here in more rural areas where actually I live, further down in the south of Berlin, there was an old lignite mining sites. And people were discussing, can we really do it? What does it mean for social welfare? What does it mean for job employment? And we have seen if we are doing these investments on the other side of Berlin, it's the same state, we call it Brandenburg there. We have now one of the biggest wind power companies also for all over Europe, Enertrag. It's the European champion in wind power. They invested 4 billion in renewable energy over 25 years. In the beginning, everybody was saying these are the green dreamers. But now they are securing our energy, especially when we were phasing out of Russian oil and gas. And they are supplying 1 million households with renewable energy. They have a workforce of 1,200, but also from there, they are kind of controlling many wind parks all around Europe. And there are thousands of these kind of examples all around the world. And because you named also the US, also in the US. And I wonder what, for example, Texas will do. I mean, it has been one of the biggest oil and gas producers since 1940, but now it has become also the front runner of green energy. I've been there in September 2023, but I look at the numbers that I tell them correctly. Since 2019, Texas energy firms have boosted solar generation capacity by 800%. Doubled wind capacity. And the question, if they will all just put that aside, yeah, with all these stranded investments, I really have my doubts. So therefore, the question of combining green investments, and if they don't call them green investment anymore, but somehow other investments, yeah, but really seeing the economic benefit of these sites. My answer was this clear yes in the beginning. Yes, I think we have reached a good tipping point in these times that the only way forward is green and therefore clean energy.
Let's hear whether that resonates with Irina. I know, Francesco, that Irina presented some new figures today, figures that reflect data. It's on. Data that you have put together for the upcoming G20 plus. So tell us what they say to us about the era of renewable energy.
So naturally, just a preliminary number, because we are talking about the last year. But again, we have a new record of renewable installed capacity, 585 gigawatts, more or less. Last year were 473 gigawatts. So it's clear where we are going. Though we have seen also amazing progress also in the US. The US have installed 50% more in 1 year than the previous year. Germany, 15-20% more than the previous year. So I think there is no reason to be afraid. As Irina said very clearly, we have reached a tipping point where it is not possible to go back. And these numbers say also that unfortunately this progress is unequal, mainly China, European Union, US. I think good results also in India. India is more than double the renewable installed capacity tier base compared to the previous year. So all the numbers are going in certain direction, but we have Africa, Southeast Asia that has been left behind, and this is very dangerous things because these are took place in the previous one. It took more than 100 years, and still there is people that is lacking electricity. So the problem is that we have to understand that there is no doubt where we are going. We will have a new energy system largely based on renewables, complemented by the sustainable use of biomass and hydrogen, mainly green hydrogen. The problem is that we are facing the climate change menace. So the question is the speed. The most important variable that we have to confront is time. So if there is no doubt where we are going, the data say that we are half of what we needed, and next year, towards 2030, will be more difficult. Was something around 1,050 this year. Next year, we need to go for 1,100 gigawatts. So time is there, and naturally, what has been said about the geopolitics question, it cannot revert the path, but unfortunately, there is the possibility of a slowdown. Mm-hmm. So it's important everyone work to make things happening faster and faster and faster.
And of course, that is why IRENA has started numerous initiatives, including the Energy Transition Accelerator Finance Platform and APRA as well. And APRA, actually, the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables in Africa, was our very first topic today at the beginning of our day, Kevin Karayuki. And we concluded, and again, this is something that has repeatedly been documented by your bank as well as by IRENA, that far too low a share of global financial flows, which in fact are surging into renewables, but far too little is going to Africa. So if we look at Africa in the context of this, let's say, rising multipolar system, if we can even still call it a system or an order, what would you say, where is Africa today?
Thank you very much. I think in order to contextualize this correctly, I want to reiterate what we all know, that first of all, Africa has abundant renewable energy sources. I think the estimates are that Africa accounts for 60% of the best solar potential globally, estimated about 10 terawatts, that's 10,000 gigawatts. And then you have huge hydro, huge wind, and so on and so forth. But the biggest challenge, and as La Camera just said, Africa accounts for very little in terms of investments. In renewables alone, just to be precise and to quote IRENA numbers, I don't know that these are still accurate, Africa accounted for only 2% of global energy investments, renewable energy investments, which is a tragedy. Because we see that Africa can actually become a significant player in the global world as far as renewable energy is concerned. Whether it is a question of exporting molecules in terms of ammonia or green hydrogen, or even exporting electrons. I am aware of a number of very important interconnectors that are being considered by the private sector. There are 2 interconnectors from Algeria and Tunisia connecting to Italy, and I'm also aware of an interconnector between Morocco and the UK and Spain, and all these are made from renewables. But the challenge is today is that there is this issue about perceived risk. So first of all, although the resources as La Camera says, Africa accounts for only a very small percentage. Even that money that comes in, the capital cost is at least 3 times what obtains elsewhere. And that's why, as a bank, we are making strenuous efforts to ensure that we are able to bring in bankable projects that are able to reduce the cost of financing. And here I must thank Germany. We have what we call the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. Germany has supported us in kickstarting that process. And that particular effort, just to give you an idea, will be able to mobilize about $500 million of project preparation and project development capital in order to mobilize about $10 billion of investments. But I think the biggest effort that we are doing right now with the World Bank is what we call Mission 300. And Mission 300 seeks to provide new electricity access to 300 million people by 2030. But the significant thing from a renewable investment perspective is the fact that what we are saying is that in order to be able to mobilize this kind of resources, we want reforms. And one of the key pillars of these reforms is to ensure that we have a private sector oriented sort of reforms so that we are able to attract investments at the quantities and at the speed that is required in order to meet first of all, to meet the demand growth in the first instance, and also to encourage investments on the continent, even if it is for purposes of exporting power, for example, to Europe. Let me stop there for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's do a quick second round to talk a little bit about best practices, because we agreed here today in one of our panels that nothing succeeds like success. Showing what can be done is a way of stimulating more. So let me ask all of you if you can share a couple of standout examples, and I'll start, if I may, with Francesco. Irina does host the Partnership Secretariat for APRA, for the Accelerated Partnership for Renewables. So perhaps it's an APRA example about how we can mobilize more capital for investment in renewables in Africa, but maybe it lies somewhere else in how we bring down capital costs and boost investment. So whatever strikes your mind as a good example.
So when we talk about the cost of capital, the capital is the fever. When you got a fever, it's a symptom of something else. So we have not to look at the symptom, we have to look at the cause of it. So why is it so difficult to invest in Africa, first of all? Naturally, there is this de-risking that is very important, but there is one element that must be clear. It will be impossible to proceed at the speed and scale needed in Africa if we don't invest in the infrastructure. So the infrastructure is the main barrier to go faster in renewables in Africa. This has to be clear. We have sent this message now from a few years. We have been hurt concerning the tripling, and this is enough for the time being. But I think that we have called it that we need the multilateral financial institutions to put in their reform process, not only the fact that the decision-making process should be more inclusive, is okay. More concessional loans and grants is okay, but focus on what they have to do. And we think that building the infrastructure for the new energy system should be the first task of the multilateral financial institutions. Also then, they don't have the resources for doing that. But if there is a clear plan, it will be much easier to attract the interest of the private utilities and invest together. So I think this is, I hope that before or later, in the spring meetings this year, perhaps this argument, because everyone now is speaking about the grids, everyone. It was not so 3-4 years ago where Irina was a lonely voice, but now it's evident that this is there and has to be solved. This means that APRA is a very interesting initiative, but should be also, see what APRA can do. APRA can do to enhance, send first a message, because 7 countries in the beginning started to say that they want to go for renewables. Now they are 11. First there will be 15. So we have been able to change through APRA the narrative in Africa. And this is important. You remember that a couple of years ago that we are talking about transitional fuel, etc., etc. Now they are talking about renewables. And this, I think, is important to do. APRA could be a very important element of the Mission 300. But again, and I close because I've been too long. I've been also today, I've been provocative in the other occasion. But you really think that you can solve the problem of access to energy to people, providing a small grid when the people has not the money to pay the few cents for the electricity? There's no stand. So if you are not able to link the idea of development with the building of the new energy system, we will fail. So we have to find a way to get the people the revenue for paying the tariff, and the work will be different. And I close with the usual example that I do. After the Second World War, Europe was like Africa. Without the investment in the infrastructure, coming from the friends from the Western world, now we are not having 4 European countries in the G7. This has to be done for Africa. This has to be done for Southeast Asia. If we don't do that, we are going to fail.
In fact, we heard an Assistant Secretary General from the UN and leader in UNDP tell us today we have to link the energy transition not only with development but with fighting inequality. And let me go to the Minister to ask what role collaboration plays in that. You talked about the tripling up and doubling down goals that we signed up to at COP28. And one of the things we agreed on here again and again today is that even in the face of a geopolitical context that seems to be all about competition, we must continue to collaborate to reach those pledges. So how do you see that, and how do you see Germany's role going forward?
To be an enabler. I mean, we don't have to convince anybody anymore to say, let's go green. But I think the most important questions being raised at the last climate conferences were those from countries, ministers, heads of state saying, well, don't preach to us, provide us the grids, provide us the capabilities. And I think this is really important, especially for those who are anyhow convinced to understand that, especially from countries which cannot just mobilize like we did, 500 billion in our constitution, they told me we cannot go home and promise to triple renewable energy, even though we know if we're not doing it, our island will die, because people also in our country asked us, so how do you deliver? So if we do not give everybody the tools, the technical tools, but also the money in their hand, all the partners we are having, and there are more than 160 countries, they will sign whatever climate treaty there is because they know that the climate crisis is about the future of their own country. But if they do not have the capability, even the most convinced are not capable, especially in democracies, to deliver. And therefore, all these projects, like Kevin mentioned the one, APRA, where Germany is really active, they are also projects we are doing not only for green energy, not only for energy security, but also for strengthening societies, strengthening democracies. And in this understanding, I'm also with Francesco. This is my second point where Germany is engaging. We are heavily engaging, and this is also my call to the new government, in the reform of the World Bank and the IMF. The money is there, but it has to go to the countries which really need it, and it has to go to the green investments. And I would like to say something also again for reflecting ourselves. I mean, it's not about if green energies are into grids or infrastructure, these are not capable of being corrupt. Or if it's not about a money or power game, because we have seen also from investments, and for example from China, if they have debts with these countries, you can also tell a country, now I paid for your whole national grid, and no, you owe me something for something else when we talk about security and peace in the world. So the question of the infrastructure and mobilizing money for the infrastructure, again, is also a major role for international institutions, because otherwise we will have new dependencies. And understanding this, I think, is so important for this geopolitical connection, and this is why we are lobbying so much of bringing down the interest rates, of bringing down the project's cost. And because it hasn't been named yet on the panel, and you asked for a good example, there is this Green Guarantee Group. Germany is sharing it together with Nigeria. Again, very important to have this European-African co-chair, which is exactly pointed at this, bringing down the capital costs. And if I may, a last example from the local level again, because you have to also engage people and not from Germany. Again, I'm jumping to the US and jumping especially to the state of Texas. There is a county, it's called Oldham County. It has only 1,700 inhabitants, and they had a huge problem with school finance, talking about Texas and everything else, but this is their issue in the United States. But because they invested into a new wind farm, and they did a similar thing what we are also doing in Germany since a couple of years, saying to really convince the local community they have to benefit from this renewable energy project. So they did in Texas the same as we are doing now also here in Eastern Germany. They said 3/4 of the revenue will provide the new school funding. So they build windmills, and by that also a new school, especially for those who cannot afford normally private schools. And combining these two things, again, I think would be a great example, also especially for regions in the world where it's not only poverty, but speaking about Africa, it has the best sites for solar, but it's also the continent where 600 million people do not have access at the moment for any kind of electricity. So bringing the two together, I think, would be the best projects we could invest in.
Thank you very much. And by the way, green guarantees did come up a number of times in today's discussions, for a lot of praise as well. Kevin Kariuki, pick up on the point that we just heard from the minister, if you would, in regard to multilateral development partners, agility and flexibility. What reforms do you think would help, especially multilateral development banks, to be more able to get money into project organizers and governments' hands when it comes to financing the green energy transition? We've heard lots of calls here today for blended and concessional finance. And as Annalena Baerbock said, the money is there, but it doesn't always flow and it doesn't always get absorbed. What do we need to change?
I think one of the things I want to say here is that in the course of our involvement with the World Bank in Mission 300, one of the things that is a must is that the governments and the minister has just mentioned here that there is not, there have 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. It is also important that the resources of the World Bank, the resources of the African Development Bank is actually their resources. So they must be able to commit in their policies that to prioritize electricity access or energy access in order to be able to develop those projects. I always say until a government considers it important that there is we need to prioritize energy and therefore earmark the resources that have been made available by the World Bank, by the African Development Bank, then there will be no translation of the need for energy into projects. So that's that number one. But number two, I think what the minister is talking about is real. And what this is saying, we need to find creative ways of being able to use the resources that are available to expand, to be able to reach more people. And one of the things that this is one area that the African Development Bank has done extremely well. When it comes to hybrid capital, we were the first people to do hybrid capital sort of amongst the MDBs. And that is huge. And the second other area is the issue of what we call the special drawing rights. I know there are challenges, but we've worked with the Inter-American Development Bank, and we found a solution that could actually be able to enable that the special drawing rights to be channeled through MDBs and therefore increase the path for the resources. And in so doing, for example, if we had X amount of special drawing rights, using the mechanisms that are there within us, we can be able to sort of multiply by 4 times and therefore probably increase more resources. But at the end of the day, what you are interested in are the development outcomes. And I wanted just to highlight this Mission 300 effort, because there are very important aspects of it that I wanted to share, because I do believe here we have German investors and other people who would be interested in the energy transition. And I wanted to highlight the 5 key pillars of the Mission 300. Number 1, we talk about least cost power expansion plan of all the countries that are part of Mission 300. And in so doing, what we are saying is that we look at all the resources of energy, and as I said, Africa had huge renewable energy sources, and therefore come up with an energy plan for the country. Number 2, as La Camera also mentioned, the issue of transmission assets. We talk about generation, but we always forget that you need transmission assets, and we also want interconnectors. And number 3, we keep on saying that, by virtue, for example, of Africa's population distribution, it's very fairly interspersed. And therefore, we need to understand that there are people who will never be, for a long time, will not be able to access the grid, and therefore you have distributed renewable energies. And what we are saying here, I think we found that almost 50% of new electricity access by 2030 will have to be through distributed renewable energies. So it's a sector that we cannot ignore. And again, what are we using? Renewable energy, and also the private sector. I've said all these huge projects that I spoke about that are meant for export of power from Africa to Europe, they are all by the private sector. And what we are saying, as part of the reforms, we must ensure that the reforms actually enable private sector participation. But finally, we must have utilities that are bankable, because without bankable utilities, then you cannot be able to have people contracting to provide power, and so on and so forth. So I think those are the 5 pillars, and I do believe that what we are doing in Mission 300 will ensure that we have reforms that will enable us to address the energy poverty on the continent in a definitive manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And in fact, we learned today that if Mission 300 is successful, by 2030, that will cut in half the number of people in Africa who don't have access to power. We have just about 1 minute left on the clock. Let me go back to the minister and ask you, if you look ahead to BETD in 2029, so right before we get to that 2030 landmark date, what would you want to be the top priority that this forum should achieve by then?
Because I'm having all my foreign ministers ahead here as well, I have to connect it to the peace in Europe, if I'm thinking of 2029. So Ukraine, which is at the edge of entering the European Union in 2029, being connected to a European electricity grid, which is at well, I reach now high, yeah? 80% renewable energy, so Germany has to be almost at 100% by then. And why I'm quite positive in the thinking is, if I can look back, in 2015, we had this historic climate conference in Paris. And we have a joke here in the foreign ministry, at which page was renewable energy mentioned in this treaty. And we have 2 documents here, and I'm always wrong with the document. It was only mentioned once, renewable energy, and only related to Africa. And now we are 10 years later, yeah, and the world has decided 2 years ago that the future is renewable for everybody. So in 10 years, we have achieved together a revolution. So in 4 years' time, in 5 years' time, we have to achieve half of a revolution. And this means we are way ahead on this goal of making Europe the first climate neutral continent, and then also in a Europe of peace for everybody.
Minister, thank you very much for that optimistic closing message here. And thank you very much to Kevin Kariuki, to Francesco La Camera for joining this discussion. And
Can I say what?
Of course.
What I want for 29 to happen here?
Yes.
I want to have Abek and Babuk here with us.
In whichever capacity you may join. Thank you very, very much to all three of you for this wonderful discussion. And